Running migrations on existing databases. In this video, I'll show you how to make a change in the data model classes and have Entity Framework Core update an existing database using a migration. This will take us into the heart of the OpenAir.data project and help you understand what some of the important classes are when trying to further develop this project. This isn't a comprehensive tour of the .data project, but will get you well on your way to understanding how we've laid out the project so far. In short, this app provides a way for pilots to quickly search for and schedule times and training routes they'd like to fly. The pilot signs up with their information and then can log in and schedule flights. As you can imagine, you'll need a database to efficiently keep track of everyone's flights and make sure there aren't any scheduling conflicts. On screen, you'll see an ER diagram of what currently exists in the database. As you can see, there are several entities that currently exist. There's a pilots table where pilot info is stored. From there, a pilot can have 0 to many flights. This is the database representation of pilots scheduling flights they want to fly. Each flight must exist on one of the routes, so every flight has exactly one route. These are the important features of the database that I'll have us extend. I'll give us a fictional situation where the customer would like an extension of capability in the application. Suppose the customer would like a way to log the number of flights a route is hosted moving forward. That definitely sounds like a situation where our database needs to be extended. So how might we do this? I can think of a simple way to handle this. It's to add another column to the routes entity named something like flight count. Let's say it will be an integer and it should also never be null. How can we use the entity framework to make this change? I'm glad you asked. Let me show you. So in Visual Studio, I have the solution for the OpenAir application open, and we're going to go to the models directory in the OpenAir.data project. So under here, we are going to look at route model, because that's where we wanted to add our flight count. So the way we have it set up now is we have an interface iRoute, and route promises to implement this interface. So let's change it in the interface first. We will say public int flight count get set. Good. So over here we should have a red squiggly. Maybe. Oh, that just showed up. There it is. So if you look there, it says does not implement the interface. Okay, well we can hit Alt Enter and just say implement the interface. And it automatically generated some of the stuff for us. We will just do something like this. And inside of here, let's set it equal to 0. So that'll be our default value. And let's move it up here with the other attribute. Now you may be wondering about these. These are some containers that we put in here of a certain type that Entity Framework recognizes to set up different kinds of multiplicities between entities, but we won't worry about that too much right now. Next, I'll show you around the data context class where we'll enforce our not null constraint. Okay, so where to find our database context? It is located in this directory in the OpenAir.data project again, model context. So we'll just minimize this for now and open up OpenAir.db context. Now you should note that you have to have at least one of these database contexts for Entity Framework to do anything. You need to have at least one database for Entity Framework to even make any sense to use in your project. But you can have more than one, and the case where you would have more than one is where you have more than one database that the application needs to access in order to work. But we just have one. Now let's take a look. Here we have a connection string that we set up, and this is where we define the path for Entity Framework to go out to and build the database when we finally ask it to. So you can see this MSS SQL local directory. That's what we saw up in the Object Explorer, and we're telling it needs to be named OpenAir Local DB, which you can see it matches. Next, you can see these DB sets, and they're DB sets of a specific class in our model. And a DB set is a type of container, and it's what Entity Framework is expecting to see inside of a class that extends DB context. And when it sees this, it builds a table based on the attributes inside of Pilot, and it names it pilots. So that's why all of these are here. Here's just a overloaded constructor in case we would like to define the connection string as something other than OpenAir local DB, which we have an instance of that happening. It's in our system test project, which I won't go over now, but we do point it to a different database because it makes sense to have a testing environment and then an environment for the application to run on. Now, eventually, you would like to point this at a remote database, something like an Azure Cloud database server, and you should just be able to get the path for that. Instead of server equals this, you'd have server equals whatever you happen to name it in your Azure account, and then tell it what it's named, and most of that will be just the same. Next, let's look at the onModel creating function. So it requires you to override this, and this is where you set up the constraints that you want to have in your database. And the way we have it here is that we have these maps where we set up each of them individually. So let's just take a look at the pilot map, just as a for instance. Pilot map. Okay, so here's just a thing to make Visual Studio happy. It really doesn't like that it might be null when it gets passed in here, this entity builder, so we're promising that it won't be. Entity builder.hasKey. So this is defining your primary key for the table, and we're saying it's their email. So it seems reasonable to us. The next one is property is required. So this is your not null constraint. And that's what we want to implement over in our route for flight count. So we'll open a route map, and we will say entity builder dot property. Write this lambda r dot, there it is, dot is required. There. And that's really all there is to it to set up the not null constraint. So we will go ahead and save it. Let's build, make sure everything went okay. There's no mistakes hanging around I didn't see. Yeah, this warning is not something we can get rid of. That's a result of all of these packages you can add through the NuGet package manager, which I'll go over later. But they're created by third parties and have updates all the time, so sometimes they have an update where it makes a different package mad. So that you could suppress this. We haven't, but we haven't been able to figure out a way to get rid of that warning. But anyways, it looked like it succeeded, so that's a good start. Now we're just going to run the migration pretty much how we did before, and then observe the changes inside of the database. So why don't we go ahead and open up the package manager. There it is. Oof. Okay. So if you remember, please be down here. Thank you. It goes entity frame core / add migration, and in a shortcut you can just put the name here. So we'll call it demo second migration. So far so good. Oh, see, it always sets this back. You got to make sure it's on the dot data. So why don't we try that again? Alright, so let's move this down a bit. So if you remember from the last snapshot we saw, it had create tables, like calls for that for every one of the entities we wanted to create, but here it just starts with add column. So all it's doing is extending what already exists. So this is good because if you already have data inside of your tables, but you need to extend it, you don't have to somehow save all of your data somewhere else. It's built to be safe when you extend it, so it's one of the great upsides of Entity Framework. So you can see the snapshot. Now let's open up that package that's down here, Package Manager Console, and we'll update our database. So Entity Framework Core, update database. Be wonderful if it worked the first time. We'll see. Hey, well, that looks good. So there's your SQL code to just modify the existing table to add a column. So now, turn this down a bit. Over here, if we hit refresh, open up that same database, look at the tables. You can do it, I believe. There. Routes. If you remember from before, it said there was just one column and it was the primary key. So, and look at that. There is our new column. So that sums up what I wanted to go over for this video. The next video I'll do troubleshooting tips, excuse my language, troubleshooting tips, and that should probably wrap up the series. This video went a little longer than I expected, so I'm going to refactor the content that was originally planned for this video into 2 videos. But anyways, thanks for watching.